warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And so here we are in Malaga on our final day on this great tour with Tazkiyah tours in Al-Andalus, exploring the journey of the Muslims, the life of the Muslims, the achievements, the high points and low points, and then the final expulsion of the Muslims from Al-Andalus. Now we're in Malaga. Malaga was a very instrumental place in the Inquisition of the Muslims. The Grand Inquisitor, in fact, was based in Granada, but he had delegates, and one of them, of course, would have been here in Malaga. The Inquisition is something that's very important for us to understand what it was and what it led to then for the Muslims. A man called Nicholas Emerick, he wrote a book called Directorium Inquisitorium, and this was a textbook, a guidebook for the Inquisition, how to be an inquisitor. And so he had different things about different tactics that people should use. The whole idea was anybody who was who denied aspects of Christianity, particularly in respect to the Trinity, was liable to suffer at the hands of the Inquisitor and suffer punishment because of that. And so therefore this affected Muslims a lot as well as Jews, because both of them are proponents of very strict monotheism. Now his text became very important for the first main Grand Inquisitor was named Thomas de Torquemada. Torquemada was somebody who was known for introducing this idea of Dios la Quer. Dios la Quer was the Dus Vult, the God wills it of the Latin Crusaders. And so the Crusaders marching towards Jerusalem, sacking Jerusalem and massacring the Muslims in Beit al-Maqdis would have these slogans of Dus Vult, God wills it, meaning it's divine approval for that slaughter and massacre of the Muslims. Dios la Quer means the same thing. It means in Spanish, God wills it. So therefore, as the Inquisition is taking place and all these horrific treatments, and punishments and methods of punishment against Muslims and Jews and other heretics are taking place, the slogan is the Thomas de Torquemada is Dios la Quer, which means God wills it. Now there was a kind of a brief moment of some ease for the Muslims and the Jews and other heretics during the appointment of the Cardinal Hernando de Talavera. Talavera, in fact, was one of the cardinals of Ferdinand Isabella, and he was, a bit sympathetic to the Muslims. He was a bit respectful towards Islam, and what he proposed was just conversions of the Muslims, as opposed to killing them. Better to convert them than to kill them. And this went on for a while, but it gave the Muslims some degree of ease, because they were resident in their faith, and in their faith they wouldn't convert so easily as the church would have liked. But he then, of course, was to die, and then the new appointment was a man called Hernando de Gonzalez, and he was he was a Grand Inquisitor, and he was very strict in his policies against the Muslims. The whole idea was to burn Quran 1502, the mass fire in Granada, burning Qurans. This continued. You had the Pragmatica, you had the banning of Arabic, you had the forced learning of the Ave Maria in Latin. There was things like, they would inspect all kinds of things in the Inquisition. They would see are people eating with their right hand as opposed to their left hand. If it's the right hand, then it's indicative that they're Muslims. One would have to force-fed pork. Eating pork, drinking wine was supposed to be a test to see if you're a Muslim or not. And even in some examples, the cursing of the Prophet ﷺ was designed. It was part of the Inquisition to test the faith, to test if people are Muslims or not Muslims. These were Moriscos. These were the last remaining Muslims really in the Netherlands. And so that was Gonzalez, and then the final one was a man called De Cisneros. De Cisneros, in fact, had three functions in Al-Andalus. One, he was Grand Inquisitor, that's his biggest function, and he was also Archbishop of Toledo, and so that gave him a lot of power and control. And number three, he was the confessor to Isabella. And so those three functions really gave him a lot of control in Al-Andalus. And his whole idea was to burn Qur'ans, burn mosques, and burn Muslims. His whole idea was burning as punishment. Now, where they got this idea from was that they had to show that the punishment had to resemble punishment of hell. right? So if in their mind they're going to be punished in hell because they deny Christianity and deny the Trinity, then they would have to be punished in a similar way on earth, and that's why they resorted to burning and also other very horrific punishments against the Muslims and against some Jews and against heretics also. Now, what did this lead to? If the books of the Muslim, the Qur'ans, all the books on science and so many literature is being burned in the grand fires of Granada, Muslims would resort to hiding things. They would hide manuscripts, pages, underground, bury them on their ceilings, behind walls and wall cavities. They would hide things, and this remained like the last. This was like their last connection to their faith with respect to these small items that they kept to themselves. They then became the Moriscos. The Moriscos had to hide their faith, and Allah in the Quran gives us the example of Musa alayhi salam and his time, his people. And Allah says, وَقَالَ الرَّجُلُ مِنْ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ يَكْتُمُ إِيمَانَهُ أَتَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا أَنْ يَقُولَ رَبِّيَ اللَّهُ. A man from the time of Musa said, who Allah says, يَكْتُمُ إِيمَانَهُ, he had to hide and disclose his faith. And he's telling people, are you going to kill a man because he says, my Lord is Allah? So that's like under the severest, most harsh circumstances, people had to resort to hiding their faith. And Allah gives us an example of that person in Musa alayhi salam's time. In this occasion, of course, in Al-Andalus, it was a lot of people had to hide their faith, Moriscos. And so what would they do then? How would they do? How would they navigate through like living as Muslims undercover? They had laws. So one was the banning of Arabic. So you couldn't speak in Arabic. You couldn't dress in Arabic dress. You couldn't eat with your right hand. You couldn't. Another one was eating sitting down. So if you're eating sitting down on the floor, it's a sign perhaps you're a Muslim. If your nails are cut, and shortened, it's a sign that you're maybe abiding by Islamic hygiene custom. If you're going to be Muslim midwives were banned because there was a fear that they were going to call the adhan in the child's ear when the child was born. What about burial? There was a danger that if you have Muslim grave diggers, they could bury the Muslim facing the Kaaba, the Qibla, and so they had to ensure that there were no Muslim grave diggers. And so they had all these policies just to try and ensure that the faith of Islam was completely, stripped away from these last remaining Muslims, the Moriscos. And of course, we're speaking about a country, Al-Andalus, where Islam was everywhere. In Cordoba you had 600 masajid, mosques, 500. You had 300 libraries and 50 hospitals, and you had Islam was everywhere. You had the Mazarib, the Mus'arradeen, and you had people who are not even Muslims, but they loved Arabic culture. They would eat and dress and try to just resemble the Arabs because of their love of Arabic language and love of Arabic culture. And so this was a sad and very unfortunate ending. At the end, however, with these Moriscos, the Muslims had to think of ways of, what do you do? They had to think, well, what can we do? And so they began to hold secret meetings. And one of them is an example of, what's his name? His name was Damiat something. And he was a faqih in Valencia. So, as a faqih in Valencia, what he had to do was, in order to bring these Moriscos together, he held congregations for them. He had things like the women must come in disguise, wearing all makeup and wearing like nice clothing as if it was a wedding. The men must come like very smart as if it was a wedding. They all come to his house. He's the faqih and the imam, and he's giving the sermon, the khutbah, the reminder, holding a lute, and that was designed to be some kind of a cover for him. And you had other examples as well of Muslims who would have to do these kind of things just to remain Muslims. Of course, the way that they would be instructed to make wudu was by making tayammum, by just wiping your face and your hands and your arms on dust from the walls. But because the Christians had been living with the Muslims for so many hundreds of years, they knew this. This is in the Islamic books. And so they even came to a point where one of the fuqaha said, you look at the wall, look at your hand, and then you rub your hand, and that would be sufficient for you as making wudu. It was about surviving in the most extreme circumstances. They had to think about how we can survive as Muslims in these situations. And then what followed therefore was a rebellion. And so yesterday we were in Al-Pajaris mountains. It was the final leg of our journey. And in Al-Pajaris there was two rebellions. The main one was 1568, 69. And this is because in 1526, the Pragmata indicated that Muslims can't speak in Arabic or wear Arabic clothing or whatever Arabic customs there were. And the Muslims, the Moriscos, and those even who are Musa'arabin, the Mozarabs, who were not even Muslims, they appealed against this. And they paid a sum of 80,000 ducados to have this suspended for 40 years, and it was successful. But in 1625, then a year before the 40-year deadline was up, they said that learning the Ave Maria was obligatory upon all people. And then there was a synod of repression, and so they couldn't have it revoked, they couldn't challenge it, and they realized things are going to become very hard now. The Mufti of Iran, 1504, gave the fatwa, for the Muslims of Al-Andalus, that now your time has come where holding on to your faith will be like holding on to hot coals. It's like our Prophet said that time would come just like that. And so they were preparing themselves for this. They would hold secret meetings in the mountains of Al-Qajaras. They would try and encourage other Moriscos to come together for this. And they would have some small, actions against bishops and some attacks against churches. But it got worse. And when it got worse, their tactics changed. And so they began to stockpile of food and oil and weapons, even in the mountains of Al-Qajaras. And then their numbers grew in the, double thousands. The numbers grew, and they had a lot of these Moriscos were with them now, and they thought about how to make a sustained campaign against that very harsh treatment against them by the Catholic Church. And so they elected a leader called Hamayo Fernando de Valla. They elected him, they dressed him in the garments of Umayyad colors, to remind them of the previous days of their Umayyad rule in Andalus. And then began to just launch attacks against the church. At the end of it, they had some support from the Uthmani, Khilafah, some support, but it wasn't enough because the Catholic Church by this time was very strong, and they'd taken all of the main areas of Andalus. Seville, Cordoba, Granada were all under their control from 1492. They lost Granada, of course, as well. And this was the concept. So you had therefore the Inquisition, and then you had the Moriscos, and you had those who had to hide themselves as secret Muslims in this time. And they thought of many different ways of being able to do that, making wudu in secret, teaching Quran in secret. I'll end on one interesting story. So they found the Muslims had devised their own language called Al-Jamiado. Jamiado was Catalan and Portuguese vernacular with an Arabic script. And so it was very hard therefore for the non-Muslims or the non-Arabs to be able to read. And so they would write down, decoded messages, with this new language, Al-Jamid. And by the way, it comes from the word Al-Jama'a, which means the body or togetherness. And so it was indicative of...
Señor.
It was indicative of their hope to remain together as Muslims in their final and darkest and hardest hour. And so now there is, in the manuscripts that they found of these writings in Al-Jamiado, they found one repeated story. And the story is the story of Carciona, the handless maiden. So this was kind of a fable. It was like a fable. It was like a story that parents would tell their kids. You'd have it read in family gatherings. The story of Carciona, the handless maiden, is that there was a girl and she was living, in a Christian home, and a dove comes in through her window, and a dove tells her about Islam, and she then embraces Islam at the invitation to Islam from this dove. And as a punishment, her father cuts off her hand before she's the handless maiden, and she runs away to the woods, the forest, and the wild animals in the woods, they raise this young girl, the handless maiden, and they care for her and they look after her. And then one of the princes of Al-Andalus, he's obviously he's not a Muslim, but he sees her and he falls in love with her. And when he falls in love with her, he attempts to take her out from the woods, and he takes her back into his palace. And when he goes in his palace, she stays there in comfort, and he accepts Islam from her. And then there's a kind of a coup taking place in his palace because his friends are envious of him because of her. And so she's kicked out again and falls back out into the woods, into the forest, and she's raised again by the wild animals. By this time he's become king, and he goes and finds her. He finds her, brings her back, and then her hands begin to regrow. And when her hands regrow, it reflects a kind of a rejuvenation, a revival, that there's going to be a restoration of Islam. And this was one simple example of the way that Muslims, right towards the very end, were holding on to something. Our Prophet said that a time would come, people would say, Allah, Allah, and that would be enough to save them. And so we ask Allah, Allah accepts from those last remaining Muslims because of their efforts in trying to hold on to their faith. And may Allah grant all of us thabat, consistency, and never make us of those who bow down to pressure. May Allah make us proud of being Muslims all the time. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.